Hi, welcome to Learning English with Pros. This is the channel where we draw on many years of university experience to provide you with reliable information on the English language and handy hints on how to improve your English. Hi, in the previous video I said something about the translator's lateral movement being restricted quite considerably. And this is also something that's true of what we're going to look at today, namely noun phrases, but in a slightly different way. If you're faced with a particular phrasing, for instance, you need to search through large corpora, for instance, to find a satisfactory equivalent in the target language. Today's session is more about the grammatical features of noun phrases that tend to pose problems for Germans, or obviously also the other way around for English native speakers when translating into German. So in this session, you'll learn that the use of determiners, mainly articles, but also other determiners, differs between English and German. What's particularly difficult, I think, is the use of the so-called zero article, so no article at all. And we're going to explore that in more detail in a minute. You'll also learn that German compounds are not always rendered by English compounds. So a word like Entwicklungsmaßnahmen or things like that, very long compounds, can be rendered very often just by simplexes, simple nouns such as development. And English plurals often translate as German singulars and vice versa. Cattle, for instance, which looks like a singular noun, is used with a plural verb. And there are other instances like that which are quite interesting and which translators need to familiarize themselves with. So let's start with a few simple sentences for observation, which we'll try to translate into German. She worked 14 hours a day. So this is a kind of partitive relation, 14 hours a day, 14 euros a kilo, and so on. She worked 14 hours a day. Of course, that's the arbeitet 14 Stunden pro Tag. Try to remember this for the next activity. Are you interested in the piano? Well, with musical instruments, we don't use the definite article in German, but it's commonly used in English. So we normally say, bist du an Klavier interessiert, or bist du an Flöte interessiert? Taking up the piano. Are you interested in taking up the piano? And so on. He's an accountant. We're giving someone's profession here. He's an accountant. In this case, we use the indefinite article in English. In German, we do not use an article. So we have to say, ist Steuerberater or Buchhalter, depending on the context. I've got the flu. Article use varies with diseases. With flu, we normally use the definite article in English and dispense with the article in German. Ich habe Grippe. With cancer, for instance, both languages dispense with the article. With earache, for instance, you can say both. I've got an earache, I've got earache. In German, that's simply Ohrenschmerz, and we use the plural, and so on. So this is rather complex. He took me by the arm. That's another one that's rather complex, because if the body part comes straight after the verb, we'd use a possessive pronoun, a possessive determiner. He took me by the arm, but he shook my arm, for instance. He shook me, it doesn't work. He took me by the arm works. but he shook my leg, for instance. The doctor shook my leg. Here you have to use the possessive pronoun. So if the body part comes straight after the verb, you use the possessive pronoun. In other cases where the body part occurs in a prepositional phrase, you use the definite article. I was wearing my new sandals. English tends to prefer the possessive pronoun in such cases. German can also opt for the definite article in these cases. Ich trug die neuen Sandalen. But of course, you can also say ich trug meine neuen Sandalen. You just have to remember that in English, you prefer the possessive pronoun. Let's see if we can apply what we've just learned to the other translation direction. Die Zahlen steigen 1% pro Jahr. Figures rise by 1% a year. That's the same as in the first sentence of the previous activity. Sie möchte gern Lehrerin werden. Profession. She wants to be a teacher. She wants to become a teacher. Sie spielt Gitarre. She plays the guitar. The guitar. We need the definite article here in English. We said that the definite article is usually used with musical instruments. For is an exception because here we're talking about a musical score, duets for piano and trumpet. So that's slightly different. Er hatte Kopfschmerzen. He had a headache. With headache, we always use the indefinite article. With flu, as we've just seen, we use the definite article. In British English, at least, the definite article is usually used. He had the flu. The indefinite, the zero article is marginally possible also. He had flu. Der Hund hat sie am Bein gebissen. We said that if a body part occurs within a prepositional phrase, was part of a prepositional phrase, then we have to use the definite article. So we have to say, the dog bit her in the leg, or the dog bit her on the leg. Both in and on could be used here, I think. Sie hat sich das Bein gebrochen. In this case, Bein comes straight after break, so we have to use a possessive pronoun instead. She has broken her leg. Deutschland ist Mitglied der NATO. This is about article used with organizations, and here you have to be careful, or with proper nouns generally, you have to be careful, streets and so on. In this case, no article is used. Germany is a member of NATO. Here's a paragraph taken from an economics textbook, which I'd like you to translate into German. I'll read it out first. Let's take a simple example. A particular product proves to be increasingly popular with consumers. Increasing demand outstrips supply at the existing price. A shortage develops and price increases. This rise in price makes production more profitable. Okay, have a go at translating this little text, and we'll come back together in a moment. Now, you shouldn't worry too much about terminology here. That's easy to solve. Things like demand, Nachfrage, supply, Angebot, and so on. We'll see how to translate that. What's really interesting about this text is the use of articles, and you may have noticed that price is used twice without the definite article. Price increases, this rise in price. That's a rather unusual use, perhaps, or one you may not have noticed before, which dispenses with the article. It's not difficult to translate, though, in a way. Okay, but let's start with the first sentence. Let's take a simple example. That's one of these phrasemes that we discussed last time that are used in academic language. In German, we have a very similar phrase, nehmen wir ein einfaches Beispiel, which is particularly appropriate to textbook style, as in this case. A particular product proves to be increasingly popular with consumers. Well, ein bestimmtes Produkt, we don't actually need to say bestimmt here in German, just ein is sufficient. So that's another typical feature of especially academic English, adding particular in the singular if you want to single out just one item. In German, the indefinite article is usually sufficient here. So ein Produkt erfreut sich bei den Konsumenten wachsender Beliebtheit. Erfreut sich wachsender Beliebtheit bei den Konsumenten. Aber wer erweist sich als zunehmend beliebt? That's perhaps not quite as felicitous as using the nominal construction. Okay, increasing demand. Increasing demand is also used without the article here because demand is an uncount noun, a non-countable noun in English, and these nouns often dispense with the article also. So we have increasing demand, but in German, of course, we need to say die wachsende Nachfrage. Outstrips supply, übersteigt das Angebot. So again, in German, we have to use the definite article. At the existing price zum bestehenden Preis. A shortage develops. Es entwickelt sich eine Knappheit. And price increases und der Preis steigt. Der Preis. We can't say Preis in German. This rise in price, dieser Preisanstieg, we can use a compound here in German. That would be preferable to saying dieser Anstieg des Preises, der Preise. Dieser Preisanstieg makes production more profitable. Again, no article in front of production. In German, of course, macht die Produktion rentabler. So try to keep these features in mind, these types of article use in mind when translating the following paragraph into English. Again, I'll give you some time to peruse this little paragraph and then to have a go at translating it. So how will we translate this particular paragraph? In den Regionen der Welt, wo der Hunger am größten ist, we've learned that with abstract nouns like price, for instance, we do not normally use the article, and hunger is just a statistic here, so we wouldn't use it with an article. In den Regionen der Welt, wo der Hunger am größten ist, in those parts of the world, in those regions of the world where hunger is greatest, hat sich die Gesamtproduktion an Nahrungsmitteln in den letzten 30 Jahren verdreifacht. Again, in German we use the definite article in front of die Gesamtproduktion an Nahrungsmitteln. In English that would simply be total food production, no article. Total food production has tripled over the past 30 years. Allerdings hat sich der Nahrungsmittelvorrat pro Person in diesen Gegenden kaum verändert. Nahrungsmittelvorrat pro Person, well, that's simply food per person, no article again. However, food per person in these regions has barely changed, has hardly changed. Und die Bevölkerung wächst weiter, and population, no article, is continuing to grow. So we've now learned that in English, uncountable nouns often dispense with the definite article. And this also applies to variable nouns like comparison, for instance. So it's quite common to say comparison between private and state schools reveals blah, 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 blah. You would not normally say the comparison here. So just comparison is sufficient. It's thought of as a kind of mass noun, an uncount noun, a bit like milk, an undifferentiated mass, if you like, comparison. But of course, you can also use it with the indefinite article. If you make a comparison between the UK and some of the other major territories, we're charging too much. This is a particular comparison, so you use the indefinite article. Okay, let's see if we can translate the following sentences, paying attention again to article use here. So, in Nordirland ließ die Reaktion nicht lange auf sie warten. This is, of course, about the noun reaction, which is also variable. So we would say, reaction in Northern Ireland was immediate. Reaction in Northern Ireland was immediate. Die Nachfrage nach Verkehrsflugzeugen ist stabil geblieben. Demand. Demand for passenger planes has remained stable. Passenger aircraft. Demand for passenger aircraft has remained stable. Die Belege sind dürftig. Evidence is scarce. Or, of course, depending on context, you could also say the evidence is scarce. Now, you may remember that in session 1 we saw that highly specific German compound nouns such as Bildungssystem often correspond to rather imprecise simplexes in English. So education is Bildungssystem very often. Let's try to apply this insight to the following words, the words which I've underlined here. Development, technology and energy, savings, oil, challenges and responsibilities, futures, administrative considerations, inherited problems. I'll give you some time to read these sentences and then we'll discuss them together as usual. So let's go through the sentences one by one. In a sense, we must take a more business-like approach to our work without sacrificing our understanding of the importance of people in development. And the context here, of course, is aid to third world countries. So it's about the importance of people in development. And German would certainly opt for a compound here. We would say something like die Bedeutung der Menschen im Entwicklungsprozess. Next sentence. The top 200 companies listed in the Dow Jones, the share index, are all committed to the triple bottom line, economic, environmental, and social sustainability. And according to the index, they are outperforming others, particularly in technology and energy. Here German tends to add something like Bereich. Im Technologie- und Energiebereich, im Maschinen- und Energiebereich, or something similar. One of the main aims of any credit union is to promote savings. Savings, in this case, is the activity performed by savers, and that in German is usually referred to as Spartätigkeit, also die Spartätigkeit fördern. Among the developing countries without oil to sell, orders for American arms had gone up from blah, 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 blah. Developing countries without oil to sell. In German, we would probably use Ölvorkommen here. Entwicklungsländer ohne Ölvorkommen. So Vorkommen is a good word to add to oil. It's a very common compound. The possibilities are endless, but whatever your specific challenges and responsibilities, your creativity and intellectual rigor will have a direct impact on the MOD's future development. The MOD is the British Ministry of Defence. So this is taken from a job ad. And of course, in a job ad, challenges and responsibilities refer to basically the job you'll have to do. So that's your Aufgabenbereich. Aufgabenspektrum might also work. How could the part be managed? What are its possible futures? Well, here we have a plural in English. In German, we would need to use a compound again to express that plural. Entwicklungsmöglichkeiten für die Zukunft. Is the machinery of government organized according to political expediency or administrative considerations? Here German often uses verwaltungstechnisch. It's not always a joy to have children with inherited problems. That's usually translated as erblich bedingte Probleme, which is not really a compound, but a combination of a participial adjective with an adverb. But again, we can see that German tends to be more complex here than English. So let's apply what we've just learned to the other translation direction, where we need to turn German compounds into English simplexes, into English simple nouns. The examples I've chosen here are Medien- und Kommunikationsinhalte, Glaubensinhalte, and Lehrinhalte. The first three sentences all contain the element Inhalte within the compound, but they are not translated in the same way. So think about what Inhalt means in each particular context. Then we have Neidgefühle, compound containing Gefühle, Steigerungsraten über fachliche Qualifikationen, an adjectival compound, and Führungs-Know-how und ihre betriebswirtschaftlichen Kenntnisse. So I'll give you some time to translate these. You don't need to translate the entire sentences. Concentrate on the nouns, but take the context into account. Now these are possible solutions. Medien- und Kommunikationsinhalte, content, singular of course in English, in media and communications. Glaubensinhalte des Individuums, belief systems, or simply beliefs. You can pluralize belief in English. Lehrinhalte in a religious context, of course, would be teachings. Religious teachers give teachings. If this involves doctrine, dogma, if you like, then of course you could also say doctrinal teachings. Neidgefühle, soziale Neidgefühle, is simply the singular in English, envy. Envy is usually an uncount noun, so you'd have to use the singular here. Steigerungsraten, well, that's increases. An overview of increases in food production. Überfachliche Qualifikationen werden immer wichtiger. Das sind allgemeine Qualifikationen. So in English, that gives us general qualifications. Die Teilnehmer sollen ihr Führungs-Know-how und ihre betriebswirtschaftlichen Kenntnisse verbessern. Well, here you have to ask yourself, what's Führung in English? This might be either leadership or management, depending on context. We can't be sure here. Betriebswirtschaft is business management, business studies, business administration. So we could say something like hone their management or leadership and business skills. Now, similar considerations hold true for combinations of German abstract nouns with adjectives. They need to be treated in a similar manner very often. Here's an example. Darüber hinaus kann den Ärmsten durch bessere gesundheitliche Voraussetzungen is always a difficult word to translate into English, but often you can just do without it. Und umfangreichere Bildungsmaßnahmen geholfen werden. Well, in English, that gives us quite simply better health and more education can also help the poorest people climb out of poverty. Isn't it simple sometimes? So now try your hand at the following sentences. In zwei der Songs Love at First Feel und Squealer wird über die moralische Vertretbarkeit des Geschlechtsverkehrs mit Schülerinnen nachgesonnen. You can start with two of the songs are ruminations on. Es gibt zahlreiche Möglichkeiten, die Ausnutzung der vorhandenen Räumlichkeiten durch besseres Management zu optimieren. Und diese Organisation hatte bei der Förderung des Umweltschutzes eine erfolgreiche Vorreiterrolle gespielt. Think about that for a moment. So in the first sentence, moralische Vertretbarkeit can simply be rendered as morality in English. You don't need an adjective-noun combination here. So that we could say two of the tracks, Love at First Feel and Squealer, are ruminations on the morality of sex with schoolgirls, the morality of sexual intercourse with schoolgirls. Even Geschlechtsverkehr can simply be rendered as sex, so there are two instances here of this particular class shift. Es gibt zahlreiche Möglichkeiten, die Ausnutzung der vorhandenen Räumlichkeiten durch besseres Management zu optimieren. There is significant potential too. I'd already given you that. Die Ausnutzung der vorhandenen Räumlichkeiten. Well, to optimize or improve the use of space, quite simply, through better management. Diese Organisation hatte bei der Förderung des Umweltschutzes eine erfolgreiche Vorreiterrolle gespielt. This organization had taken an effective lead. To take a lead, had taken an effective lead in promoting environmental protection, for instance. So to take a lead in German, that's a rather overcomplex noun, Vorreiterrolle. Now, after those rather strenuous exercises, this little exercise is meant to provide a little bit of relaxation. It shows us that translation can sometimes be almost automatic because in the area of terminology especially, German and English resemble each other quite closely sometimes. So we have automatization. What's that in German? Automatisierung. Computerization. Computerisierung. Globalization. Globalisierung. Decartelization. Well, careful. I think German prefers Entkartelisierung here. So with the prefix D, we have either Ent or D in German. Destabilization, that's Destabilisierung, of course. Dehumanization, Enthumanisierung. Remilitarization, Remilitarisierung. Reprivatization, Reprivatisierung. Wheelchair accessible, Rollstuhl gängig, Rollstuhl gerecht. Tax deductible, steuerabzugsfähig. Resource rich, ressourcenreich. Machine washable, maschinenwaschbar. Society destroying, gesellschaftszerstörend. Export inhibiting, export hemmend. Pain killing, schmerztötend, schmerzstillend is more common, sorry. Computer assisted, computergestützt. Vitamin enriched, Vitamin angereichert. State funded, staatsfinanziert, staatlich finanziert. Hearing impaired, hörgeschädigt is the the adjective that's commonly used in German. So you can see that there are certain patterns that operate across languages and that can be quite useful for the translator to know. Another well-known translation procedure between German and English is when an English plural corresponds to a German collective noun. So how would you translate the following English plurals? The doctors. I'll give you an example. The doctors is die Ärzteschaft very often. This also avoids the whole gender issue, whether to say Ärzte and Ärztinnen in modern German and so on. If you say die Ärzteschaft, that's a feminine noun, everyone will be happy. The civil servants, what might that be then? Die Beamtenschaft, of course, yes. The prosecutors, die Staatsanwaltschaft. The workers, die Arbeiterschaft. The bank's rules, that's slightly different. That's die Satzung in German. The mountains, that's das Gebirge. My experience is, meine Erfahrung. To harmonize taxes, die Steuergesetzgebung harmonisieren. Cries, very often we use nouns formed with the prefix ge, ge in German here, Geschrei, biscuits, Gebäck. I've already mentioned uncountable nouns. They're also called uncount nouns or non-count nouns in dictionaries and grammars, and this is a problem you may remember from your school days, but the only noun you'll have encountered at school is probably information. Most teachers know that information can't be pluralized in English. So if you want to say, ich habe 3 Informationen für Sie, how do you say that in English? Well, I have 3 pieces of information for you. Okay. There are lots of nouns like this, of course. I've provided a whole list here of these nouns, which you can read through for yourselves. Software is another instance. Er hat eine neue Software entwickelt would be he developed a new piece of software, or he has developed a new piece of software, depending on context. Die Nachrichten sind nicht gut. Well, news is singular. The news is not good. Wir haben verschiedene Ausrüstung getestet. We have tested different types of equipment, perhaps. And of course, you can't say equipments. You can't use it in the plural. Now, the case is slightly different with these nouns, which are usually plural, or rather usually, or can take either a plural verb or a singular verb. So they can be interpreted in different ways, depending whether you see them as a whole or as the separate parts that constitute the whole. Cabin crew, for instance, company, crowd, family, fire brigade, flora, and so on, are part of this group. Auf der anderen Seite des Feldes lauert der Feind im Wald. 3 Uhr wurde die Polizei gerufen. Die Polizei wird gerade umstrukturiert. How would you translate these sentences into English? Well, you can't really go wrong with the first sentence because it could be either across the field the enemy lurks or across the field the enemy lurk in the woods. Sentence 2, however, would have to be translated using a plural verb. 3 Uhr wurde die Polizei gerufen. In this particular sense, police is always used with the plural. The police were called at 3 o'clock. When it's about the organization, die Polizei wird gerade umstrukturiert, then of course we can also, or we would even usually say, the police is being reorganized, because this is the system we're talking about. Then there are a number of nouns which are always used in the plural, or rather with a plural verb. English collective nouns. Cattle, for instance. Folk or menfolk, womenfolk, townsfolk. Personnel, staff, youth. These are always used with a plural verb. So try to translate these sentences keeping that particular feature of these nouns in mind. So, Rinder sind von Natur aus sozial und bilden kleine Herden. That would be cattle are naturally social animals and form small herds. Nach dem Schlüpfen wird die Brut in Süßwasser aufgezogen. After hatching, the fry are reared in fresh water. Und der stark verschleierte Weibertross schützt sogar die Fotos auf seinen Personalausweisen vor neugierigen männlichen Blicken. This must be some report about an Arab country. The heavily veiled womenfolk even shield the pictures on their identity cards from prying male eyes.